Hey, I'm the Lion King or the Tiger King or whatever the hell you call me, and I'm gonna murder you.
Hello?
Oh no. What?
We're on.
We're on! How can I explain being a man of my age playing with Beanie Babies? How am I going to talk about that? How am I going to explain that? This is the show called Isolation Nation. And we're here in case you're thinking to yourself, I want to see a grown man playing with Beanie Babies. Or if you're thinking, wow, this pandemic has really messed with my head. We can give you help because we can talk to people who've experienced it as well. Plus, we can give you expert advice. So why am I playing with the Beanie Babies? There's actually an explanation besides it's so much fun. This guy, a bat may be at the root of all of this. And I'm saying to you right now, we've got the ultimate bat expert. Dan Riskin is going to join us. Plus, a guy to give you some tips on how to deal with this thing up here, Roger McIntyre. And then there's, by the way, this is the 8th of April, 2020. And this is day number 6 for us. And also day number 21 without a button on my pants. It's so good. We had to go with it again. Great job, Case.
Thank you.
And why am I wearing a Team Canada jersey? I'm wearing it because I can and because I want to and because Hayley Wickenheiser is here. Hayley Wickenheiser, 4 gold medals, more than anyone in our history, and a member of the Hockey Hall of Fame.
To present Hayley with her Hall of Fame plaque, 2010 inductee, Angela James.
Wow, Hayley Wickenheiser. I mean, it's pretty incredible. First of all, a 4-time gold medalist, which is as many as anyone in Canadian history has ever won in the Olympics. And then you decide, it's time to move on with my life. And now you are completing medical school at the University of Calgary. My first question for you, though, is how are you, Hayley?
I'm good, Michael. It's nice to see you. It's been a while since I've seen your face. I hear you often.
It's nice to see you too, because you're one of my favorite people, and because you've been kind enough to come and speak about mental health, and that has meant a lot to so many people. So, is hockey behind you from this standpoint? Not do you not care anymore, but do you crave it still, or do you feel like you've been able to replace it with something that is different but equally important?
Oh, no, I think I'm able to do both right now, which is kind of nice. I think I would probably miss it if I wasn't in it, but at the same time, it's been nice to have a different focus at times with medicine. So working with the Leafs in my role in development, my days were prior to the pandemic, at the rink from 8 in the morning till 1, and then I'd start my shifts at hospitals around 2 or 3 till about 10 or 11. So it's been a nice mix, actually, because I think too much of one or the other might be a lot of burnout, but I've enjoyed it. And everything I learned in hockey, I've taken right into medicine too.
That is, life experiences are, even though some life experiences can be bad, I think they all make us better, and we can all use them at some time, which is incredibly philosophical, because I am, the philosopher here, at least for the time being on this show, except for the 3 guests. And we have 3 great guests today. Isolation Nation with Hayley Wickenheiser. So, how are you doing? And when I ask that question, I don't mean how's school going. I mean, with this pandemic, with COVID-19, with the social distancing, how are you doing?
I think honestly, Michael, it's been a bit of a roller coaster, probably like everybody, like emotionally, I'm here in Toronto. My family is all in the West in Calgary, and obviously my son is out there, so I can't see them, but we see each other FaceTime, Zoom, and all those types of things. So I feel far away, and for some reason, but at the same time, I find that idle time here for me isn't good. So I like to stay busy. I like to stay connected. Every day I vow to train, so a couple hours a day of physical fitness, because that's the only thing that seems to keep me feeling sane. But I think, like everyone else, I have great faith that we're going to get through this, and it's a weird time, but no one's spared from this effect, that's for sure.
You know, one of the things that, and this is something that those of us that speak about mental health talk about all the time, is the perception of weakness, that somehow anxiety and depression and a whole host of those garden variety mental health challenges are based on a personal weakness. So if you can actually say, you know, it's kind of a tough time for me, people will not equate the two. People will say, well, Hayley Wickenheiser, man, if she's finding this tough and tense, and if she's a bit anxious about this, then I got nothing to be ashamed of.
Yeah, for sure, Michael. I really admire what you've done with your platform, in the sense that you're right out there talking about it. I hear you on the radio every day. I hear you, you know, you're very open. I think that it gives people a lot of allowances to feel the same way. And one of the things that I've seen in medicine, and being in, especially in the emergency room, is that a lot of people come into the emergency room and they're not necessarily sick. They just want contact, and they feel alone, or they need some support, right? And you're not medically, there's technically nothing wrong with them, but there is that isolation. I think in a pandemic like this, that amplifies to the next level. And so for anyone out there that's feeling like anxiety, or this, my friend described it as this free floating anxiety. She's a 20-year emergency room doctor, and she's feeling it. And so I find myself going through this a few times every day. And it's just like, I tell myself, okay, I'm going to worry about this for about 15 minutes this morning and 15 more minutes at night. And then I'm just going to carry on with my days and try to make the best of it.
So Hayley, I know that you're really interested in emergency medicine. So, I mean, this time, emergency medicine and ICU medicine are like two of the biggest things going. I mean, it's kind of like our world in medicine revolves around that. I know that also as a medical student, you were saying that your rotations are not happening right now. So you're not in the ER. Have you been in the ER since this pandemic began?
Yeah, I've been in the ER since January 9th, up until about 2 weeks ago, where they pulled all the, let's call it, rookies out of the trainees out of the emergency room and out of the hospital in general, so that the attending doctors can just focus on dealing with the pandemic, not having to teach people like myself. So I've been doing other things, contact tracing, PPE, sourcing, all those types of things. But I did see the start of this pandemic come in, and I watched sort of this wave ride until a couple of weeks ago when we got that email. So I have seen COVID patients. I haven't treated them myself, but I have watched patients been intubated and things like that. Yeah.
Right. So I guess the question is, because a lot of us have a tough time relating to what a doctor does anyway. And the comment that most people give is, oh my God, you know, how do you stand the pressure of making a diagnosis, for instance, when you know that the stakes are high? But at this time, there's this massive admiration for sure, but also intimidation by the fact that you will go into the environment with patients who are sick when everybody else wants to get away from them. I mean, social distancing tells us don't go near anyone, yet you're forced, because of the nature of your job, to go right up to people who you know have this illness. You know, what was that like for you?
Maybe I'm naive and early on in my years, but I think it was probably because who I was surrounded with. I only saw one situation where a doc didn't want to go in an isolation room because he didn't feel like he had the protection, which is fair, which is why we need PPE for the healthcare workers. But in general and overall, I didn't see one instance where healthcare team, nurses, doctors, staff were not interested in treating someone. And I said this to my friend the other day. She's a 20-year emerge doc. She said, you know, I got to stop having my friends text me that I'm so sorry you have to go to work, because I want to go to work. This is what I was trained for. And I said, you know, this is like the medicine Olympics for you. This is your time, you know, and that is how I think a lot of the great physicians and people on the front lines think of this. This is why I did this, so I could help. And there is no second thought about their safety other than being protected.
Right. But it's also possible to say, I want to be there. I should be there. I'm trained for this. This is my responsibility. I love the fact that I can make a difference in people's lives. You could say all of that, but also say, I'm really scared. I'm really nervous. I mean, the stakes are incredibly high right now.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point, Michael, because I will also say that is also the narrative. I have my job to do. I want to do my job. I am scared if I don't have the protection And if my team isn't confident in backing me up, you know, and going into a room to intubate someone where the particles are aerosolized and you're a foot away from someone's face and you have a high viral load, that is where they are nervous. And I think there is a lot of uneasiness, you know, am I going to bring this home? And what do I do? Because the information is changing by the hour and we just don't know enough about the virus. So I just describe it as free floating anxiety. It's definitely out there. And I feel it myself, even though I'm not, you know, intubating people on the daily. I talk to my friends and it's transposed into my body.
You know, I have a name for it. My goal is to take everything in life and shrink it down to one sentence, one hashtag, one name. So I've been searching for this, and I'm going with DOAP, DOAP. It's COVID-19 induced mental health challenges. It's not a mental illness necessarily, but it's the challenge of D, depression, O for OCD, A for anxiety, and P for panic. And you put them all together, it's like they get all mushed up, and that's what many of us are feeling.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think a lot of folks that I work with on, you know, in medicine on the front lines are A-type personalities, go getter, and you know, sometimes you don't stop to take a minute to check yourself and your own emotional level and anxiety level, and it can get pretty high. And I think in this scenario, there are a lot of folks that are truly afraid, but they're soldiering on anyway. And that's why it's just so important that we support each other, especially when we're isolated.
Right. I kind of feel like you're going to steal the dope thing. I think you're going to go and you're going to be saying, no, you know, I just came up with this thing. And, you know, because it's not like I suffer from chronic long-term depression, right? That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people that maybe have never thought about their mental health before, but now maybe need to acknowledge the fact that this is a time of great struggle. Okay, I know you've got to go, but you've spent the last, I don't know how long, is it week? Looking for protective devices for your colleagues. So everybody has the appropriate equipment, personal protection equipment to do their job.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, it started with a tweet. It went from my tweet to Ryan Reynolds and 35 million other people to 700 emails in 12 hours to hundreds of thousands of pieces of articles of items. So right now we've partnered with a group called conquercovid19.ca. There's a drive this Saturday from 9 to 5 p.m. at XYZ Storage at 459 Eastern Avenue in downtown Toronto. But folks can also go to the website to donate equipment or cash. And also, if you need stuff as a doctor, care worker, frontline paramedics, you can go on the website, sign up, and we're trying to match everybody that needs stuff with stuff to get this out right now. So it's an amazing effort. It's a group of Good Samaritans, U of T Med students, entrepreneurs that are coming together. Purelator, Canadian Tire, Volvo, all these big companies stepping up, and it's really kind of blown itself up. So we hope that we can help Ontario and Quebec fill some gaps for now where it's the worst. And for me, it's really personal because I couldn't find an N95 mask a couple of weeks ago when I had to go to an isolation room. So I've lived this movie a little bit.
What's the website again?
conquercovid19.ca.
One sec, Casey, write that down. conquercovid19.ca. Unfortunately, I have no idea how to spell conquer, but wait 1 sec. CONCER. Got it. Oh man, I nailed that.
No, CONCQER.
I know. Look at Hayley. You know, I'm in medical school. I must be way smarter than you. You know what, Hayley?
Media types.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much. And I'm going to say this in the context of just friendship and admiration. I love you for just being you and genuine and real. And thanks for doing this. Great to see you. Great to chat with you.
Yeah, you too, Michael. And as always, thank you so much for what you're doing. And you're a good friend. You've been for a long time. And, you know, stay healthy through all this. It's got to be tough for you and a lot of folks listening too. So my best.
Yeah, you know, it's just it's one of the challenges is that I'm a social person, right? So when I see people on the street, I would normally go up to them, and it's challenging to, you actually have to learn how to be rude. You cross the road when you're walking your dog. You would never do that without insulting someone. Okay, you go do your job, and we'll talk soon. And again, we'll mention that website again. Thank you.
All right, thanks. We'll see you guys. Take care. Bye-bye.
That's, well, not yet, but soon to be Dr. Hayley Wickenheiser. I'm sure she's got honorary degrees, without a doubt. She's just unplugging here. So if if that's what you're seeing right now, it's cool. Honorary degrees, though, not the same as getting your doctorate, becoming a doctor after all she accomplished. I was speaking with her in Hamilton. We were giving speeches together, actually a fundraiser for SickNotWeak. And she said, I think I want to go to medical school. And it was like, wow, and now here we are 3 years later, and she is pretty damn close to being a doctor. But she's not a doctor yet. So we had to find one who was an official doctor. And the best we could do was a head doctor. And I don't mean, well, he's actually a head as in he's, chief in a lot of different places. Dr. Roger McIntyre is a psychiatrist. He teaches at many different universities, not all of them even on this continent, and not even in this hemisphere. He also is a psychopharmacologist, and he joins us right now. Roger, how are you?
Hey, Michael. Good to be with you. And just to pick up on Hayley's comments, thanks for all both of you are doing. Frankly, this has just been fantastic to see for not just people here in Canada, but people around the world who watch the show and so on. So it's great. And thanks for having me on board today.
Yeah, thanks for doing it. And, you have an expertise that's always appealing, to me, but also you have a particular interest in two things that are particularly interesting to me. And I think the most relevant questions that we can come up with, not necessarily just at this time, but in general, and that is depression and suicide. Yep. Is it fair to say that we as a country have not done well in preventing suicides, that we are still trying to feel our way and find our way?
I think it's fair, Michael. I really do. This is something that I have spent my entire career. I've met with many, tens of thousands of families who have a person or persons in the family affected by depression. And, throughout that journey, I've met many people who have committed suicide and families affected by suicide. And when you look at our Canadian landscape, the numbers are really, in fact, incredulous. We have over 4,000 people committing suicide in Canada a year. That's over 10 people a day. Over 10 people to 15 people a day commit suicide in this country. And that's what's registered. So you can probably guess it's even higher. And the numbers haven't been coming down. The numbers have been going up. And obviously it's very concerning. And I look at it from different perspectives. Obviously, it's a tragedy. It's a horror, in the first degree. But in addition to that, if you step back a step, there's a lot of this is preventable. This isn't sort of a done deal. It's not like this is meant to be. And what I've been quite struck by in my experience is as I'm a clinician, I see patients. I'm an academic. I'm a scientist. But as a patient, and I really try to see, as a clinician and seeing patients and as an advocate of people who have these problems, what I've been quite struck by is that a lot of this is preventable. Now, it's not all preventable, but a lot of it is. In other words, if you look at our country, our wealthy, very well, supplied country, Canada, country we're all proud of, the majority of people who have depression in this country are not getting the appropriate care. And I've been saying for a long time, we've had awareness campaigns that I think have done a great job. And, and I know, Michael, you've been in the forefront of this. We've been having many private-public partnerships help us out. It's been great. But, I really would like to see, in fact, much more resource paid to what is really the most common problem in Canada, that being depression, particularly amongst young people. And so I'm very concerned about it. And the other part, Michael, which I'm also concerned about it, we're talking about COVID-19. Of course, this is a terrible situation. But before this came along, we had a loneliness epidemic in Canada, the United States. A lot of young people, old people, but especially young people. And this is linked to suicide. And I think that, we've got to better understand this stuff. And I think when, I think about the and allocated, what's going on in psychiatry, it gets me going. I get pretty,
me too. Here's what I think, and you tell me if I'm wrong. Everything I know is experiential. Everything I know is anecdotal. I haven't done a lot of double-blind studies in my life, but what I find is that the greatest ally for suicide is silence. That when you're afraid to talk about it, when you've never heard the word, imagine a 17-year-old, this is what I think, who's never heard the word suicide. And while that person's parents may have spoken about drunk driving and safe sex and going to parties and being responsible and the importance of an education, chances are if that kid is going to die prematurely before he's 30 or she's 30 years of age, it's going to be from suicide. Yet, to me, people don't talk about it nearly enough.
You're absolutely right. And I think that it's something that leaves people a lot of guilt after they have a loved one who's committed suicide or a friend. And you're absolutely right. In many cases, this person has been, marinating the thought for a long time about self-harm and suicide. It gets complicated very quickly because, here we are in 2020 and we in the medical world still have no way of predicting who's going to do this. I wish I could tell you, look, we've got an app, we've got some technology, some way to predict this. And that's what makes it so scary. And one of the aspects about suicide, in addition to its unpredictability, is its impulsivity. People often do it very impulsive. And that is something we need to better understand and in the scientific community and how we can better sort of track that. But your point's well taken. Too often people feel alone. And this is in part why we have a lot of concerns about what is the inevitable financial and employment consequences of this COVID-19 situation. We saw during the financial crisis an increase in suicide in Canada and the United States, in part because of financial hardship and disconnection. And so I think we need to be especially vigilant for this. And yes, we want to flatten curves in terms of infection, but let's actually prevent curves of mental illness.
As you were talking about it, I was thinking, and I wanted to ask you the question before I actually found out, a lot of what you do. But my concern is the upturn in mental illness. Some of it being maybe not even mental illness. Like I wasn't a joke before, but when I said dope, depression, OCD, anxiety, and panic. It's this like mixture that people have. But people who had pre-existing mental health challenges, I'm really worried that they're going to get more severe and we're going to see, more suicides.
I couldn't agree with you more. And, when you think about COVID-19, look, I mean, everyone's being affected terribly. It's obviously unthinkable what's happened here. But when you get into the kind of weeds of this, there's some people and some groups that are more affected. I mean, clearly people who are less economically stable, they don't have a choice to stay home. They have to go to work. We've been hearing about increased mortality amongst African Americans in the United States. And the other part, Michael, is people who have mental illness, in part because of economics. But the other part is that people who have mental illness also have some of the risk factors for complications of COVID-19, like diabetes, obesity, and smoking. Those are much higher in people who have depression. And so that, along with this social isolation, I mean, we rely on social connections to really go with the punches in life. That's how we go with the punches. We use people for support. And that's been really, yes, I mean, we got technology. It certainly offers some opportunity. But for a lot of people, they don't even have that available. They don't have the ability to pay for Wi-Fi and so on. So it's very disconnecting. I'm very concerned.
Yeah, it's a really frightening time from every dimension. And the one that gets forgotten, it seems, is not the physical one. Everyone is worried about this invisible virus. But the problem is this illness in our heads that, I always talk about this, that until you can prove that you have depression, for instance, and I know you have like real-time PET scans these days that maybe can do that, but until someone can say, hey, take a look at this. This is my depression. People will always wonder whether or not it's real. Okay, we got to continue this. I'm fascinated by it. And I'm thankful that there's somebody in the medical world who acknowledges the fact that we got to do better. And I appreciate that. And thank you for doing this today. And give us 2 weeks and come back on.
Be great. Thanks, Michael. Thanks.
Really enjoyed it. And you can stay on the line if you want, because, who doesn't want to hear the Batman talk? The Batman is Dan Riskin. And, Dan's standing by, but Phil, roll it now. Here's Dan.
Hey everybody, it's Bat Week. Here's your bat fact of the day. The tube-lipped nectar bat has a tongue so long how long is it? That if it sticks it all the way out, it's 1.5 times the length of its body. So to put that in human terms, put your arm out in front of you, that times 3. It's not bad. Bats are awesome.
So Dan Riskin, my buddy from the CTV network of stations, you and I worked, I won't say side by side, but, in the same building, studios the same. We crossed paths. I'm a big fan of yours, which means you can't say I'm a big fan of yours, Michael, because then it just sounds self-serving, and it sounds like that's what I was looking for.
So I'll just say this. Yeah.
Yeah. How you doing, Dan?
I'm doing pretty well. It's a crazy time, and everybody's handling it in different ways, and things go up and things go down. It's been very busy for me. All of a sudden, somebody that can communicate science is something that there's a big need for, and I'm excited to have skills that I can contribute. So I feel a certain sense that I'm doing some good, but it's a scary time for everybody.
Yeah. So here you are, a guy you are the science and technology expert for CTV. And that's a pretty broad world. Science, wow, how's science going, Dan? I mean, it's like this massive world, but I imagine anytime there's anything that's science related, you get called upon. But for the most part, what you do is kind of you use the word niche, right? And now all of a sudden, what you do and your expertise with bats is mainstream, right? And all of a sudden now the stakes are way harder when people talk to you and ask you questions.
Yeah, it's interesting because, when we were working together, I was hosting Daily Planet or co-hosting that with Zaya Tong. And it was like, hey, Dan, give me some science that's really crazy and wacky and give me some neat story. And so I'd, always be looking for that weird thing that would sort of catch people's attention. And it was always sort of a fun thing. But everything's changed in the last couple months. And now people are like, hey, I really need to know how viruses work. Like, are they on my groceries? And how do I tell? And if I get sick, can I get it again? And, what's going to happen to my mom? And so those kinds of questions are very different. And the skills that I bring are the same, right? You look up as much as you can, you read, you integrate it, you question everything you're reading, you look for good sources, and then you come up with a clear, concise message about what you understand, and then you communicate it as effectively as possible. But it's a different audience. This audience is leaning forward a lot more and is asking harder questions, and the stakes are higher. So it's been very interesting for me, and I feel like I'm still sort of in the midst of it. I mean, it's every single day right now. So I think it's only with hindsight that I'm going to be able to look back on this, because this is temporary. This won't last forever, even though it feels like it. And I know I'll be looking back on it saying, like, what was that? It's a weird time.
Yeah, it is the weirdest time that most people have ever experienced. I mean, my dad is 89 years old, and he, like I said to him, how would you compare this? And the only thing that even someone who's been around that long can compare it to is World War II, when the whole world was at war. And now we're all on the same side, but we're still at this war that we don't know, who's going to win and who's going to lose. It's really scary, but there's an expertise that you have that all of a sudden is in demand, right? Like you're known as the Batman, right? Because you have studied bats. You are a leading authority on bats. Did this coronavirus start with a bat?
Yeah, I remember my Aunt Helen, when I got my master's, she says, what are you going to do with bats? Who cares? And I'm like, somebody is bound to care at some point. And little did I know, things would change down the road in 20 years or so. So the bats are usually left alone by people, but there are a lot of parts of the world where people eat bats. And so if you go to China, one thing that happens there, or it was happening, and they say it's stopped now, but I doubt it, is that there are these caves of bats called horseshoe bats, because they have this kind of cool flap of skin that's shaped like a horseshoe. Kind of like the Indiana Colts, to put it in sports terms for you, just so you understand.
All right, because I couldn't possibly understand anything else. By the way, it's the Indianapolis Colts, not Indiana. People
there
don't
you go.
say
That's what I know. Yeah, I tried. Anyway, so these horseshoe bats live in caves, and people go catch them, and they bring them alive in cages to these wet markets, like the one in Wuhan where all this began. And they keep these bats in cages next to a bunch of other animals that are for sale that are still alive. And these animals have their own viruses that wild animals have that don't cause a lot of problems for those animals. But in that kind of a situation, those viruses, the animals are stressed, the viruses, there are more of them because the animals are sick. And then some of the viruses mutate just randomly, and sometimes they go from one animal to another. And so that is exactly how SARS, the original SARS back 17 years ago, that's where it came from, was a wet market where the virus was able to jump from a bat into something called a civet, which is a kind of like a cat. And then from the civet, it jumped into a person. And then boom, we've got SARS. And then that almost went global, but thankfully that got put out in time, because that was much deadlier. If you had it, there was a good 10% chance you were going to die with that one. The odds of death for this are a lot lower. So anyway, it was a coronavirus like this one. All the genetic sequence of this new virus matches what you see in bats in China. There was a wet market involved. It looks, for all intents and purposes, like this went from a bat to a person, perhaps through an intermediate. We don't know yet, but it's a zoonotic disease. It definitely came from an animal. So bats are at the source of it. But the last thing I'll say, especially as a bat fan, is that it's not the bat's fault, right? The bat's minding its own business in a cave, and somebody catches it, puts it in a cage in this wet market, gets it sick, and then puts it near other animals. I mean, this is how you spread diseases among animals. It's because of the erosion of nature that this thing got to humans. It's not because nature exists. The bats did nothing wrong. It was, people taking bats out of their element and forcing this to happen.
There's a question on Facebook that we received, which is, how do you know that it's temporary if it came from a bat?
Do you mean how do I know that this won't last forever? Is that the question, or is it?
Yeah,
I know?
I guess so. And you kind of play it out, and it seems like there's so much mystery there. So yeah, that would be, I guess, the question.
Yeah, I mean, so people who study epidemics, people who model them, they follow the same trajectory. It goes up and then it comes back down, and it's like a boom and then a bust. And so for a disease like this, you expect this exponential growth in the beginning, and then it comes back down and crashes, and then at some point it goes away. I mean, you look at all the outbreaks of the past, and they all sort of go away at some point. This Spanish flu. And other outbreaks, Ebola recently, there are even like a flu outbreak will have this boom and then the crash. And so what's happening right now with us all locked in our houses and this continual growth and us fighting to deal with it, that's not sustainable. It either blows up or it shrinks down. And so what we're at right now in Canada and around the world is that it's blowing up in some places still. It's still accelerating in places like the United States. It seems to be leveling in Canada. Fingers crossed. Come on, you can do this. In Italy, it's going down. In China, it's going down. And so it's changing. The nature of it is that it's changing. And the reality we're all in right now, where we're in our houses, video chatting to each other using Zoom, we'll never go back to what it was before, because things are changing forever, but it won't be like this forever.
Okay, let me ask you some quick questions about bats just in general. The virus came from a bat. Are bats sick with the virus?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, we haven't found a bat that has this specific virus yet. There's a whole family of coronaviruses that exist among bats, and they look similar to this. But in general, bats don't have very major symptoms. This is just sort of a background virus, kind of like a common cold that would circulate among people. You wouldn't say that humans really get very sick with that. And so this is a virus that didn't do a lot of damage in bats, but it had this little mutation to this one. So, when you see pictures of the coronavirus, it looks like a ball with those things sticking out of it. A virus is a tiny, tiny, tiny thing, much, much smaller than a human cell. And it's just it's like a soap bubble. And inside the soap bubble is some genetic material, some genes, like, you're familiar with DNA, but it's RNA right in their case, but it's the same stuff. And then those things sticking out are proteins. And one of those mutated, and it attaches, because it had a lucky mutation, it just happens to now be a perfect key to get into a certain protein in our cells called ACE2, and then it got into our lungs. And so even though it didn't have a lot of impact on bats' lives, once it gets into a human, humans aren't adapted to this virus at all. It's brand new for us, and so it's just kicking the living daylights out of us.
Dan Riskin is joining us. He is a scientist. He is a CTV expert on science and technology, and he is a guy who studied bats. And you're kind of probably in the background for a long time, and now I guess first with SARS and then Ebola, because the belief is correct that those illnesses all came from bats as well.
Yeah. So there's zoonotic diseases as well, and the most likely origin for those is also bats. And so with Ebola, it's probably bushmeat. It's probably people catching bats and eating them. That's how we think people got that. HIV originally came from people eating chimpanzees. So there are all kinds of diseases that live in wild animals. But bats seem to have, it's a weird sort of scientific question about why it is that bats pass more diseases than other organisms do, but they do. Bats seem to be a a real danger spot in terms of diseases that can jump to humans.
Right. So what years did you study bats? I mean, I'm sure you continue to study, but when did you first study a bat?
I started grad school in 94, and then I did that until 2000, and then I took a couple of years off, and then I did my PhD from 2002 to 2006, and then I was a postdoc from 2006 to, let's call it 2010, and then I started working on Daily Planet in 2011. So that's when I sort of left the academic world, but I still keep my eye on the literature for sure.
Right. So here's the purpose of my question. It wasn't to get your resume, but thanks for providing that. The purpose of my question was, when you started studying bats, did people associate bats with these exotic viruses that could make their way into the human population?
The people who studied the bats were warning about this. This is something that I've been hearing about for a long time, is that bats are potentially a source of zoonotic disease. And so we have to be especially careful with protecting their habitat and making sure that people don't have conflicts with them, and that places like bat caves are protected and set aside so that people aren't going in there, because there's a chance of diseases spreading. But they've already got a bad reputation because people think they all have rabies and they get stuck in your hair. They don't all have rabies, but that is another disease they can carry. And they don't get caught in your hair. That's just not true. But the disease thing, I think it hasn't been on everybody's plate or everybody's radar the way it is now. I mean, when people have been talking, so bat advocates have been saying, please stop eating bats. Please stop keeping bats in a cage at a wet market. Please just don't do any of that. They're wild animals. Let them be. Raise some domestic chickens, or, go vegetarian, whatever you want to do. But don't go wrecking nature just to feed yourself. There are other ways to feed yourself. And the reasons to do that are mostly centered around the animals. It's bad for their populations. It hurts endangered species. It's not ethical because they get treated very badly in that whole process. It's not fun to be a bat that lives in a cage in one of these wet markets. Oh, and by the way, there's a potential for a disease to come out of all this. Just so you know, bats have lots of diseases. And if you do this, there's a chance that disease is going to come out. And so that was like this, by the way, that bat biologists have been throwing around. And now all of a sudden it's the, holy smokes, this is the one thing anybody on earth is talking about right now. And it all has to do with people not listening to that advice. So it's weird for me how this sort of peripheral, I study bats, and I've known that my Aunt Helen to a certain degree is right, that, it is a little bit of an esoteric thing to enjoy studying bats all over the world. And I studied how they fly, and it's great fun. But it's weird for it to suddenly be a life or death, very critical thing. To understand where viruses come from and what role bats play. And you have to understand their biology if you don't want it to keep happening.
Okay, Dan, let me ask you some more important questions, like, what are you watching?
Well, I'm looking at data. I mean, I'm a data person, and that's where I feel most comfortable. And so I really look at the data that gets released every day, in Canada and especially Ontario, where I live, and also around the world. And I'm watching those curves. So there's one number that really matters with the virus, and that's called the R naught. And maybe people have heard about that discussed. And R naught is the number of people that you give it to. So if you imagine one person in a population has the virus, if they give it to one other person and then they get better, then now one person has the virus. And if they give it to one other person, but then they get better, it never grows. It just stays level. But if they give it to two people, well, after that first person, it goes to 2. And then 8 of them give it to 2 people. Now you got 4, then you got 8. So it's exponential growth. But the alternative is that if they give it to, on average, less than one person, if they can't give it to at least one more person, if they give it to 0 people, or on average people, it's half or something like that, some number below 1, then the virus goes away. And so what everybody's chasing right now is a disease dynamic where that R naught, that number, goes below 1. And what we're seeing in Canada, from what we're understanding of the data, is that it looks like it went below 1 some time ago. And there's a lag for how long it takes for these cases to show up. But we think that we're getting there. And so those are the data that I'm watching most carefully, because what I really want to see is this thing to go away.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, besides the fact that, you're a scientist and all of that, you also have 3 kids, and, I'm sure you're scared like the rest of us. But also, I mean, I'm kidding when I say this, but, it's kind of like you're an accomplice here, because, you are the best friend of bats, and bats have screwed up our planet. So I see you with some culpability here, Dan.
Yeah, no, I think that's something that the bat research community is getting ready to defend against. And so the the truth, the way I really see it, is that bats are the answer to this, right? Bats aren't, nobody's going to wipe all the bats off the planet. Thank God. Because if they did, ecosystems would collapse, right? Bats play an integral part. They disperse fruit, they pollinate flowers, they eat insects, they have all these jobs. So if you take the bats out of nature, nature collapses. Can't live without them. 20% of all the mammals that exist are bats in terms of the number of species. So that's just not an option. So we share this planet with these things called bats. We have to share the planet in a responsible way with these animals, give them a little space. They've got diseases. They're wild animals. So do skunks. So do raccoons. So do dragonflies. Everybody's got diseases. There's no exception to that rule. That's part of how nature works. So we have to be conducting ourselves in a way that's responsible and that takes that into account. So bats are part of the solution. We have to give them their habitat. We have to stop encroaching on their space. We have to stop bringing them out of nature and into these dirty places where diseases can breed so that they can be a healthy part of the ecosystem. So I think it's the lack of love for bats that really caused this problem. I mean, that's sort of a hippie way to say it, but if bat conservation was as important to everybody as it is to me, this wouldn't have happened. You know, if everybody was saying, you know what, like, let's give bats some space. They're wild animals. We don't have to eat that. We'll eat chicken today, or we'll eat something else. We'll have fish. If people hadn't just gone and eaten these bats, which seems unthinkable to most North Americans, this never would have happened. And the next disease might happen or might not. It's not a done deal. It depends on our actions.
You know, it's a fascinating story, and my daughter just threw me. I was snapping my fingers to get the bat, and oh God, because you know where this bat's going, right? The bat Beanie Baby.
Dog?
No, in my hair. Oh my God! You told me I was going to be safe with the bat, that it wouldn't go for my hair. And now I actually have enough product, I think, to insulate me against this. But I was kidding when I called you an accomplice to the bat, right?
Oh, yeah, of course. No, you were setting me up. I know it. I
okay. It. All right. This is so fascinating, Dan, and so relevant today. And in a lot of ways, you know, like you taught us something, which is, you know, don't blame the bat, blame the people that are invading their environment and eating them when they shouldn't be eating them. And this is a different story for a different day. But I guess if you're starving, you know, you might do just about anything to get a meal, even eat the bat. So
yeah, but yeah, you bet. I mean, I'll just quickly, it's in a city of 11 million people, and this is like it's a delicacy. This is not like people out the backside of their hut just looking for any protein they can find. This is a well-oiled machine of people that like to eat weird things. And so we'd like to see that go away. But, you know, we'll see. The world's going to change as a result of this, and maybe it'll change for the better as part of that. I hope it does. I really hope. All right,
let's continue this discussion, 10 days from now, because, who else can I talk to about bats, and who else can take something that might not be that interesting on the surface and make it fascinating? And that is you, Dan Riskin. Thank you for doing this. Don't hang up, though, because technically when guests hang up on us or click off, it poses us problems. So you just hang in there, okay?
I'm not going anywhere, man. I'm just watching you sit at your desk. Take care. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. And you might wonder, not you, but people might wonder if they didn't see the start of this, why I'm wearing a Team Canada jersey. And the answer is because Hayley Wickenheiser was on, and she is royalty, 4 gold medals in the Olympics in hockey. And now it's close to becoming a doctor. All right. When I put the bat on my head, there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is that, you got to laugh sometime. You can't all be serious. And, that's one of the things we try to do here on this show that we named Isolation Nation. And don't forget to go to conquercovid19.ca. And the biggest thing there is you can get the appropriate safety gear for somebody who is risking their life. It's hard to have a lot of credibility when you got a bat on your head. Like I said, sense of humor. Sean Cullen is our guy, and we asked him, hey, Sean, give us some tips on etiquette. Give us some tips on when you're on the street and there's someone coming towards you. And here he is. Roll it, Phil.
Hello. This is Sean Cullen. This is the COVID-19 Online Comedy Fest. People have been asking for advice about social distancing, and it's important to stay at least 6 feet apart. And this is especially difficult when you're walking in the streets and you see someone coming towards you, do like I do. When you see someone approaching, fall to the ground and start rolling around screaming. It's guaranteed that they will not approach any closer than 6 feet. If you are on the sidewalk and they are on the same sidewalk, claim the sidewalk by lying down, rolling around, and screaming. They will definitely go over to the other side of the street and give you a wide berth. Also, another handy tip, if you're walking your dog and it takes a poop, pick that poop up in your bare hand and walk around with it outstretched before you. No one will approach you, I guarantee. Hope this helps. Wash your hands, especially after the poop, and wipe your bum.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's pretty well foolproof, especially the last part. So thank you for that lesson in etiquette, Sean, and thanks for bringing a smile to our faces. We all need the smile at this time. Thanks to Jansen for saying to us, hey, you know what? We want you to do something that's going to make a difference, and especially at this time, it was the perfect thing for us. Try to always leave you with a closing thought. To recap previous closing thoughts, loneliness is not the number of people around you, but the number of people who understand you. I will fight this enemy, and this is the way I refer to my illness, to the day of my death, but it will not be the cause of my death. Very relevant considering what Roger McIntyre said. Suicide makes no sense until it does. Fight for your happiness. It's a battle that you have to be willing to assume if you're struggling. And yesterday I was proud of the shower, which means you got to celebrate small accomplishments like a shower. If you're having trouble doing anything, then you got to celebrate the small ones. And you got to be able to say, kind of Neil Armstrong-like. You know, Neil Armstrong, of course, said that's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. I think he left off the word man. But here's what I say. That's one small step. I'm talking about getting in the shower for another kind. But that's one giant leap for our kind. We'll see you tomorrow. This is Isolation Nation. Thanks to Roger McIntyre, Hayley Wickenheiser, and outstanding bat specialist Dan Riskin, an accomplice, but outstanding nevertheless. We'll see you tomorrow on Isolation Nation.
Nice job, Michael. Can you hear me?
I can.
Good job.
Yeah, thanks so much.